Crash Court Oceania Part 2. Nuclear testing by the U.S. was done at the Inuktitut Atoll out in the far South Pacific. They picked that spot because there weren't a lot of people around. There were a number of islands. You'll see later there was one island that was a couple hundred miles away that still was affected by this nuclear testing. We don't do above ground nuclear testing anymore. We do everything underground. And actually, we've stopped nuclear testing, but during the Cold War, it was a big issue. It causes ozone depletion, and you're familiar with what that is. Puts a hole in the atmosphere and starts global warming. The winds, however, were the factor for the radiation that was carried. There's another island called Rangalap. People got sick. And it's hundreds of miles away, I'm pretty sure. It's far away. But the winds over the Pacific are free flowing and they carried the radiation to this island and it created a big problem for the 5, 6, 700 people that live there. Cultural history, European exploration. Cook came there and landed in Botany Bay in 1770. That's all you got to know. I don't even think the year would be important, but it was, right around 1776. That ring a bell? That's when Cook got there uh, and started a settlement in Botany Bay, which turned out to be a big city. You'll see in a minute. British started to use Australia as a penal colony. If you were bad, petty thief, pickpockets, peeping toms, chronic jaywalkers, wife beaters, prostitutes, and hardened criminals. Hardened criminals were sent there. And more interestingly, was the fact that the Irish activists that were against the crown, Ireland has always been pissed off about being part of the United Kingdom, and they were treated as criminals, and they were all sent there. They were all sent there to live on their own. They weren't in cages or anything once they got there. They were managed, but they depict here some cages. That's just getting them there. Port Arthur Penal Colony was one of the first ones. That's what it looks like now. Didn't look like that in 1700s. But here you go with the Irish Catholics. The Irish activist Catholics were sent there because they were constantly against the crown and the management of their country and government of their country by the crown. People were pardoned if they developed farms and created a substantial living. They still stayed in Australia. European exploration in New Zealand, the British annexed it in 1849. That's, like 75 years later. And they wrote the Treaty of Watajananji, which with the Moro tribes that lived there, Maori tribes that lived there, they were allowed to keep their rights in their land, etc., but they had to accept the government of the crown, which didn't turn out to be a great deal for them as time went on, just like it worked with the United States. New Zealand is now independent. The exploration of the Pacific Islands, there were a number of countries that were active in it. The United States, of course, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Australia did a lot of exploring because they were nearby. So did New Zealand, and of course, Great Britain. These countries were all interested in exploring the entire Pacific Islands. She talked about Jellyfish Lake on the island of Palau. A stingless jellyfish, said they were pretty. She wanted to eat them. I wouldn't put too much on that. There are some that are still tied. France maintains French Polynesia, which is a series of islands. In that Polynesia segment that we saw, directly directly east of New Zealand to the right on the map, is some integration of European culture. There's a 7-Eleven French style with baguettes. I remember that from the lecture. crepes from France filled with Nutella. I think that's American. And there's just filling a crepe with Nutella. Tourism is very big, particularly in the Fiji and the exotic islands that have been built simply for attracting tourists. It is their main source of revenue in many of the islands. There's Papit, which is part of the Tahitian Islands. Pacific Islands, the colonization, here's how it worked. The United States still controls Guam. Okay. We had huge military bases there from World War II. We never let go of Guam because it's our defense for Hawaii and our properties in the Pacific. Eastern Samoa, uh, and again, there is a political base there since World War II. New Zealand maintains the Cook Islands and Niue, which I've never heard of. And the United Kingdom has been pretty much reduced to one small island called Pitcairn Island. Everything else has been turned loose. Spam, you know what it is, canned meat, started in the military, turned out to be a civilian product. It's mostly pork, and I don't like it. Different kinds of spam, and it's convenient because they get all their meat and stuff. They're they're far apart. They're far away from the major civilization. Those islands need to get food that is preserved, and hence they wound up with canned meat. They were mostly vegetarians. Here's another supermarket. Just shows you the influence of the European and the Western markets in general. They become dependent on some of our products. The traditional food, loy, not sure what that is. It's a tuber. I can't remember, but it's in the terms. You might want to check it up. The uh, the original people there, the tribes, etc. They were all basically vegan culture. I mean, everything was based around fruits and local, local growth of different kinds of fauna, agriculture that turns out to be edible. There's kava, which is that drink that tastes and looks like dirt. Uh, it's made from these little nuts or whatever it is. It's supposed to be a fruit. It's a brew that's their version of alcohol. So you really need to know about that. It makes you a little tipsy, relaxed. University of Hawaii, nothing there. Separation of the males and females. The biggest problem, human problem, that happened in Australia when they first began settling was the British decided that the Aborigines were a danger to the culture of the island. They wanted to de-aborigine them. They wanted to take them from their ancient tribal cultures and methods and make them like them. And they separated the families. They separated the children in the families, males and females, and they basically tried to program them and reinvent their lives. Uh, Scary, almost science fiction. It was a nasty, nasty time in their history, and that's what the Rapid Two Friends is about. Gender articles, okay. Well, there's the man with. Oh, what the hell happened? That was the man with his pocketbook or his bag. Getting back to it. I don't know what happened. Batel nut, that's the one that turns into like a chewing tobacco. It's used for different medicines, etc. You'll see it in the terms. Pepper leaf. It's just a pepper leaf. I don't remember anything specific about it. Common foods. There's those nuts again. Very popular. It's called a spit. Outer islands filled with lava, lava, lava. Uh, Traditional religions. The most of Oceania is uh, Christian. Christianity is the main religion in the islands, even though there are a million other tribal religions, so to speak. There's Tahiti, Papit. That's a tribal website. It has some spiritual value to it. There's that tree that she talked about. I don't know what to praise. Some kind of, uh, basically some kind of special tree. All right. There's the church, St. Faith's, no big deal. We're getting down to the bottom of this. But you can see here's a Christian church. This one's actually a Catholic church, and yet you have tribal inscribing in the pews, and it's kind of a mixed religion, but it is based on the Christian concept of Christ. I don't know what that is. I don't care. But these are some of the artwork of the Tahitians. Some think that they were tied into original aliens. Walk on water, that's a window that looks at that. Not important. Cargo cults. During World War II, the U.S. Air Force dropped food on these islands because these people that occupied the islands sometimes provided shelter for our troops as we moved around the Pacific. So they made cargo drops and they started falling from the sky and parachutes and boxes. And it became something that the people began to expect. And they still, to this day, expect these cargo drops to take place because they're so detached. They have no way of getting goods from the outside, and it still does happen. There are charities and organizations that do make the drops. Reciprocal gift exchange. You give me something, I give you something back. It's as simple as that. It's a ritual. You insult somebody if you give them if you don't give them something back when they've given you something. Religion, again, you see Christianity. It's the biggest part. There are Buddhists and there are Hindus. We brought some things over there, turned them into British rugby and cricket. They brought tea, they brought fish and chips. The globalization is all the European cultures together. This is the Italian pizza made with sweet potato. They didn't have tomatoes in the Pacific Islands until just a few decades ago. English is the British legacy. It is the main language with 80% of the people speaking it. But officially, you still have the Aboriginal languages and New Zealand, although they speak English, Maori is classified as their official language. You've heard the Australians talk, it's English. Indigenous rights refers to the Aborigines. There is no treaty. Uh, I'm sorry, not the Aborigines. No treaty. Just know that terra nullius means owned by no one, available to all. The land is free. It's owned by no one. And that pretty much refers to the land that is useless out in north of the outback, where those deserts are, where the Aborigines are. Stolen generations, you know what they are. Those are the the decades of families that were disrupted, separated, and trying to be bred into something other than the Aborigine. You have the caste system where some of these kids eventually were half Aborigine, quarter Aborigine, and so on. And they just want to try to breed the Aborigine out of them. It was very Hitler-esque. We don't need to know that. And there's Kiefer Sutherland. And that's Sorry books that were written, a series of books that were written to apologize for what that was done to the Aborigines. Indigenous rights New Zealand simply means that people of the land. Tanjit Waniu, people of the land. You may or may not remember that. You might recognize it. The Maori culture, they've adopted the rugby. They do that dance called the haka. They do that before some of the sporting events. It psychs them up. It's kind of like the jerks at a football game that paint their face. That was their traditional dance before a Maori, before a rugby game in New Zealand. There's a game, poverty and inequality. All the wealthy are all Europeans. The Aboriginals are the poor. The islands are poor for the most part. They 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 live sustainably. They live by growing and producing what they need to use, and they trade a little bit, and they some work and get some money, but essentially they're so cut off from the big civilization out in the outbacks there that it's just nasty. All right, that's it. The entire review.